Our speaker today is an associate professor of mass communications, chair of the mass communication department at Emory and Henry College. We know him as Annabelle's father and Aaron's husband. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Finney.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks y'all for having me again. At some point, I anticipate you'll get tired of having me up here, but I'm going to milk it until you do. I'm going to start by exposing the bait and switch that I have perpetrated on you all. I said the title of this talk was Happy Hanukkah, and I meant that rather ironically, so I hope you're not all very excited for a super upbeat and celebratory talk, because it ain't that. The thing is, I've always felt a little bit strange when people say Happy Hanukkah. To me, being Jewish has been less about happiness than about perseverance. And when I say or hear somebody say Happy Hanukkah, I have this moment, even when I say it myself, where I think about what that means. I've gotten up here before to talk about being Jewish in Southwest Virginia, so y'all sort of know my spiel. But the thing is, it isn't just Southwest Virginia that has been hard on the Jews. It's like history, right? History has been hard on the Jews. To be Jewish is to be a part of a group that for thousands of years has been the victim of discrimination and violence, the butt of many jokes, the other against which many people positively compare themselves. In no small part, the story of Hanukkah represents that story of marginality and perseverance. Just to, recap. So Hanukkah is the celebration of God's intervention to protect the Jews. The story is that in around 175 BC, the Jews were at war with Egypt, who they had thought was a friendly neighbor. Jerusalem had been ransacked and the temple was spoiled or destroyed. At the time, and even in many temples today, there was an eternal light, a symbol of God's eternal, unwavering presence. A symbol of God's eternal, unwavering presence and the Jews' undying faith in God. Hanukkah is the celebration of God's presence because in spoiling the temple, the invaders attempted to extinguish the eternal light. And not only did they fail to do so, but the light persisted for 8 days while the Jews manufactured the oil by which the light burned, right? And so we have 8 candles and we light a different one each day to represent the 8 days that God kept the eternal light alive. And when we celebrate Hanukkah today, we're not just celebrating that tragic intervention, we're also celebrating God's intervention in the Holocaust, the Russian pogroms, the Hollywood blacklist, the Islamic and Christian fundamentalists, the KKK, etc., right? Jews believe that God intervenes on our behalf when things are bleakest, when the odds are stacked most against us, or when we're on the brink of annihilation. Frankly, I don't like to think about this stuff. And, as I said a few minutes ago, I've always sort of wondered why we celebrate Hanukkah. I mean, I guess it makes sense for 8 days we're saying, thanks God for not letting them annihilate us again. But it isn't really a happy occasion. But why do we celebrate Hanukkah? Well, maybe it's useful to think about it in terms of our contemporary context, right? Where a baker in Colorado may well win at the Supreme Court by arguing that making a wedding cake for a gay couple is somehow an infringement on his sincerely held Christian beliefs. I mean, we're in a country today where even though Christians make up about 75% of the population, where the Christian holidays are celebrated as national holidays, where under God has been added post hoc to our Pledge of Allegiance, and yet Christians feel persecuted? I don't know. Maybe these things aren't as closely related to one another as I've put them, but I struggle to accept that there's a war on Christmas, that the teaching of world religions in public schools is somehow an infringement on our religious liberty, on their religious liberty, or that it's necessary to put in God we trust on police cars. Is it in God we trust in the United States of America? I grew up hoping that it was in the Constitution that we trusted, because in my historical memory, God has been invoked far too frequently to support the perpetration of atrocity. I'm going to pause for just a minute because when I was writing this last Friday, it was at this point in the writing that I was like, man, this feels super dark. So I'm writing this on Friday. I'm also trying to grade final exams, which, may explain the darkness to a certain extent. And I had a plan to pick it up on Saturday, but I looked at it again on Saturday and I was like, oh God, I don't even know what I should do with this. I was like, do I need to scrap this and just start over again? I looked at it Sunday morning and I had the same thought, right? But then last weekend we had Paul Norsey and Jim Best, who spoke to us about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Or more precisely, the litany of atrocities perpetrated against the Palestinians by the Israelis. So just to be, totally clear and to say this up front, I do not believe that Paul and Jim were wrong. The list of serious and mortal wrongs that the Israelis have perpetrated against the Palestinians, such as the destruction of settlements, the incursions into Palestinian territories, security measures, workplace and workday disruptions, internments, the withholding of medical treatments, incommensurate violence. These are real, right? These are all real facts. These are all things that can be independently verified. Israel has, as Paul and Jim described, obstructed the legitimate attempts to create peace in the region, has consistently dehumanized the Palestinian people and undermined their cause. These things are true. Israel, operating from a position of relative power, aided by the United States and by the United Nations, has operated in bad faith, in my view, in negotiating because they have had little inclination to negotiate or make concessions for peace. But let me suggest to you that there was one thing that Paul and Jim said which was demonstrably wrong. The Jews have not, quote, lived peacefully together for thousands of years with their neighbors. No, rather, as I described earlier, over the last 2,000 years, the Jews have been besieged, and they feel that every day today. Israel launched the 6-day war against Egypt, which ultimately won them the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights in 1967, because Egypt had blocked Israeli shipping routes to the Red Sea and amassed forces near the Israeli border. It was a preemptive attack that they anticipated, right? To the Israelis, the occupation of that land was not an attempt to knock out or infringe upon the Palestinians per se. It was because those territories were high ground that were strategic militarily to a country surrounded by its avowed enemies. Just to reiterate, I don't think that Israel's continued occupation of the Palestinian territories are just. I don't believe that the systemic discrimination of the Palestinian people by Israel is just. But as a Jew who is reminded every year around this time that we've sometimes needed God's intervention just to survive against our aggressors, I understand the impulse towards an expanded definition of security. But at the same time, I'm outraged that we're here in 2017 still fighting wars and hating people because our gods and our skin tones are different. How is it that we are so capable of dehumanizing people when they're different than us? There are real reasons, about which that people conflict, right? And at this point, Israel and Palestine, Jews and Arabs, there are real concerns. I'm not trying to belittle the basis of this ongoing conflict, but let's not forget how this all started, because some people decided, that other people were somehow less human than them. And it's not like we quit doing that over the last couple thousand years. And this is why it makes me cringe a little bit when I hear Happy Hanukkah, because which admittedly I don't hear all that much in Southwest Virginia. But I'm reminded when I hear that of how difficult history has been for the Jews, and at the same time reminded of how we humans separate ourselves and dehumanize each other. But I'm also an optimist, right? And I choose, therefore, to flip the switch on this narrative a little bit. Things have been dark in the past, and if the news lately is any indication, they will be dark again, or they will continue to be dark. But like Bob reminded us a couple weeks ago, our human spirit, or if you're a Jew, God, will save the day. The flip side of the narrative is that no matter how terrible things seem to be, and boy, during finals week and the last couple of weeks of what has been a terrible year for human rights, things feel pretty dark. But having faith and community, having faith and community will enable us to get through and be stronger in the end. And I don't mean God so much as I mean faith, because though I call myself a Jew, I put my faith in you all, in us, in this place, in the places way over there, in the places way over there, and all the people who live in those places, right? Because I have faith in our humanity. I have faith in our human spirit. That just like the oil that lasted for 8 days, so the ancient Jews could rebuild their community when they needed it. Just like the Allies intervened to save the Jews from the Holocaust and provide them with a space to call their own. That we can get through this too. I'll just read you one last thing. So I was going through this with my sister, right? She was helping me out with it. And she summarized my talk in like 5 sentences. So I'll just go ahead and read her summary for you. So this is my sister. Her name is Leisha. Have y'all met Leisha? She hasn't been here yet. Okay. So it's sort of a TLDR. Do you all know that acronym, right? Too long, didn't read. It's what, you can read a long essay or you can read a 3-sentence summary of it, and that's what she did for me. Okay. So she says, okay, so the Jews have it hard. God to the rescue. But damn, they have it hard. But then there's this Kate guy, and he's sort of a jerk, but he thinks he has it hard. Whatever. And the Palestinians, the Jews are mean to those guys. But maybe mean with a reason? For security? So maybe acknowledging everyone has different motivations and hears God differently. And then into your community, and faith in your peace.